This is the Solution Talk, Building Sustainable Peace, Bridging Security and Development in Fragile Environments. Please welcome your host from the Nightly, Latika Bourke.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Latika Bourke. I'm writer-at-large based in London for The Nightly, an Australian news publication, and also expert associate for the Australian National University's National Security College. It's my great pleasure to moderate this panel this morning with some really brilliant guests. Our topic is building sustainable peace, bridging security and development. And I think for anyone who just went to the German finance minister's talk, this is the perfect dessert to that brilliant main course of a speech, because it hit all the notes we're going to discuss this morning. So with me, we have Robin Geiss from UNIDR. We have Ambassador Angelo Dan, Benin's representative to Geneva. María Victoria Llorente from Ideas Para la Paz, Antón, Leis, who heads AECID, Spain's International Development Agency, and Armenia's Deputy Foreign Minister, newly appointed. Welcome, Robert Abisoghomonyan. Thank you. If you could welcome the panel. So, Robin Geiss, we might start with you. How do you see in this new world we're in, where we have major powers retreating on development, focusing on the security piece only, how do you see a new balance for that going forward?
Well, I don't see the balance just now, maybe to start. I see 2.7 trillion spent on military globally, the highest we've ever seen, and it follows a consecutive 10-year rise of military spending. Understandably so, if we look around the geopolitical landscape just now, and of course the threats that are real and genuine need to be taken seriously. But we do have to ask the question, in the 21st century, the formula for sustainable security is probably more complex than just deterrence and just investing in military equipment. And it seems so easy, and we've seen it time and again, that so easily we fall into a very black and white military only and at the expense of other costs. It's a simplistic kind of trade-off, and of course it's more complex than that. But if I look to the figures of 2.7 trillion just now for military expenditure at a time when most of the SDG targets are severely off track, then of course, this indicates an imbalance that we have to work on.
We'll come back to that. Ambassador Dan, security by nature conflicts are usually transnational. So how do we have a space for multilateralism in this increasingly bilateral transnational dynamic to conflict?
Well, it's true that, yes, security challenges are dramatic ones. And I'm coming from a country located in West Africa, where we are facing an increasing threats of terrorism. And in face of these challenges, we need more international cooperation through appropriate channels. And that's where multilateralism can play a big role. I think all our states, we need to engage in more international cooperation in first addressing the root causes of the conflicts. And Robin has just pointed out the question of the SDGs, that most of them are out of track. And for me, for my country, the biggest challenge is the poverty eradication, because we cannot build a long-lasting peace without tackling this essential challenge to not left any people behind. That's, for us, the most important challenge to tackle. The second dimension that I would like to also to mention is international cooperation in enhancing the preventive mechanism. This aspect is also very crucial. And I remember the workshop that Benin's Unity organized this year in January in Cotonou in the issue of control of conventional arms. Because as you know, these weapons also fuel conflicts, violence, and terrorism. And we need to uphold, to fulfill our international obligations under international law, under this relevant international instrument. And the last point also that I could add is linked to the need to promote an inclusive governance of security challenges. This aspect is also key at national levels, and it's very important to include youth, women, or local communities when addressing security issues. But But also at the world stage, there is the critical question of the reform of the Security Council. It's also an important point that I could also maybe further develop.
And we'll come back to, I think, that reform question too. That's a very good topic to raise. But I think that leads us nicely to you, because Deputy Foreign Minister, with your background in arms control, what do you see as the ideal frameworks for balancing this dynamic or this tension between security in the human sense?
First, thank you very much for the question, Julie. First, let me mention that the participation in this discussion is very encouraging in comparison to the arms control regime worldwide. We witnessed that, and we should underline and recognize it, that there is a huge degradation in arms control mechanisms. And this degradation hasn't started like days before yesterday. It has started several decades ago, and throughout these years, testing the boundaries of our collective inaction or muted reaction, it has raised and it has accumulated with what we have now. Unfortunately, the perpetrators of the situation has proven to be successful because of the lack of effective enforcement mechanisms. As it was rightly mentioned by Robin, the recent accumulation of weaponry, and it exceeds around 2.7 trillion in 2024, which is 9.5% increase in comparison to 2023. And these are the money that should have been used for development. I should say that, Julie, what begins with unchecked militarization at the end often comes up with humanitarian crisis. Mm-hmm. And the link between fragile conflict, the fragility conflict, the violation, it's not theoretical. In our region, we have already seen these linkages. And unresolved conflicts, the militarization, violation of the international law generated cycles of insecurity and underdevelopment. Actually, in this sense, our conviction is that the security cannot be stably achieved without development, and vice versa. Development cannot be achieved without security. Mm. In the situation when there is a lack of arms control regime or in functioning of the arms control regime, we should think about the confidence-building measures. In this regard, Armenia also has experience, and taking into account the sensitivities of our region, we have recently proposed to our neighbor, to Azerbaijan, a mutual arms control verification mechanism and a joint mechanism to investigate the border incidents. This is one component that can lead to confidence.
And is that having any success?
Unfortunately, not yet. But we are hopeful that in the absence of or in compliance with the binding, politically and legally binding arms control mechanism, we can manage to have local, bilateral, regional arms control mechanism that can lead to stability, that can lead to trust and confidence, because at the end of the day, the arms control mechanisms are designed for building the confidence between the states. However, we have also seen from our experience how the arms control mechanisms are used in order to exacerbate the conflicts. The other component that I would like to mention that is perfect coherence between prevention and development is the deployment of a European monitoring mission along the borderline between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Since their deployment, there has not been any major incident, and this mission has proven to contribute largely to the development and security and stability of the bordering regions. So these are a few examples, a few actions that can contribute to stability and development of the regions.
So enforcement mechanisms can work if they're deployed correctly. María, would you be able to talk about what you have seen work from your experience in Colombia at the civic level?
Yeah. Well, in Colombia, we have had like a well-known history of successes in security, both in security and peacemaking. And however, we have seen time and again that gains are not sustainable. And armed groups right now continue to reemerge. and in different formats, and also with the different levels of violence. But and while illegal economies also are expanding, and these we are witnessing this today. 9 years after the signing of a very sophisticated and well-known internationally peace agreement with the FARC rebel group, and this peace process itself was the result of a huge investment we did in Colombia for several years in security, but over the years in Colombia we have made like several attempts to implement integrated action plans, combining security and development and targeting historically vulnerable regions. But the truth is that we have not succeeded in this integrated approach. And for instance, take the case of coca cultivation. For more than 30 years, we have been working on trying to have programs, crop substitution programs, and at the same time, security eradication initiatives. But we have failed. And that's the reality, to synchronize these two approaches. And now we have had I can remember only one pilot program we had in a specific area in Colombia, in the Macarena area, once a FARC stronghold that concentrated a whole lot of coca cultivation. And this was, it has like some measurable success, but it was when the government tried to implement it elsewhere in the country, it was not possible.
And what made it a success locally?
Excuse me?
What made it a success locally that you couldn't replicate it elsewhere?
Well, it was really a very controlled program by the Ministry of Defense, who managed finally to integrate different agencies, national agencies, to cooperate and to have an integral approach in this specific area. We were in the midst of a very important military campaign against the FARC, and that was their stronghold. So there was all the national intent to really control this area, and there was aerial spray against coca cultivations. So the Ministry of Defense has a specific program targeted to this area to bring in businesses and to try to not only use the force, but also try to bring possibilities for the people. So it worked, but it was really a very difficult program to replicate elsewhere, because we don't have, in Colombia, we have structural issues. I don't have the time to go into them, but structural issues that make it completely impossible to have this all synchronized program for a long term. So that is, it is why we haven't been able to really achieve sustainable results. But nonetheless, now we are having like really a coca crisis in Colombia. We have record numbers of coca cultivations in Colombia, and it's really heartbreaking, because this has nourished like a narrative that we have failed all along. But the truth is that this narrative overshadows some positive deviations that are there, and different initiatives, local initiatives, productive initiatives that in a certain point were financed by international cooperation and have succeeded against the odds, and they're there. And why don't we try to really concentrate and focus on those specific processes that have emerged in these very, very challenging circumstances, and try to make them go to a second level instead of trying to have like this perfect plan, master plan to bring together all of the capabilities of the country and institutions to do it. So I think that there are really possibilities in trying to have like a second tier program for these special resilient communities.
Antón, Spain is hosting the 4th Financing for Development Conference, I think in only a couple of weeks' time.
A bit more.
Yes.
Don't get me too nervous.
Let's zoom back out. I don't want to put that on you. Let's zoom back out. What are the mechanisms that you see going forward for how to twin the combined challenges of security and development that we're seeing emerge on the stage?
Look, the first question I think is very important is not to make a complete contraposition between development and security. And I think the ambassador of Benin made it very clear, and the deputy minister of Armenia. You cannot have development without security, and you cannot have security without development. And we see it in West Africa and the Sahel every day. They are our development partners. And we see the impact of our projects and programs impaired by the security conditions, and vice versa, like us failing collectively, the governments and their international partners, to really address the root causes of that fragility and insecurity. So insecurity is fundamentally a development challenge. It has an economic cost, more than $18 trillion. That's about 13%, more than 13% of the world's economic activity. That's the cost of violence in the world every year. So in a world of shrinking aid budgets, not ours, Spain is increasing its ODA last year by 12%. We really see this as a moment to invest and to do more development cooperation, not less. We need to be much more effective. And one of the things we can do, in particular to reduce the more than 300 million people in the world that need humanitarian assistance, is to invest much more in diplomacy, in peace. And we are not in the best moment. There are some bright spots in the Southern Caucasus, for instance, and the deputy minister mentioned, but we have 120 active conflicts around the world. We're starting to see the laws of war actually being questioned, international humanitarian law becoming optional. We are all seeing images that we wouldn't think we would be seeing. We are seeing them. And this is a problem because it's increasing, of course, the humanitarian costs for populations, including in middle-income countries like Colombia. Again, another good example of a peace process, very ambitious, a big lesson to the rest of the world with big struggles. And there needs to be support for the international community. So you mentioned Sevilla. There is already a draft for that conference that includes a paragraph that was not there in the Elements paper, and a few countries, including Spain, insisting on putting in there, which is the humanitarian development peace nexus. And we do humanitarian work, again, in very difficult conditions, with an unprecedented level of attacks on the humanitarian system and humanitarian principles on IHL. We do development, unfortunately, with shrinking budgets, but then we have this push to become, I don't know if we will be able to do more with less. I haven't really seen. Probably we'll do less with less, but what we certainly need to strive for is to do better with less. And that means, among other things, investing in peace, on the peace element of the, and that means doing development cooperation and humanitarian assistance that is, let's put it, and again, I wouldn't shy away from this word, more political. Have our diplomacy, our development cooperation, our humanitarian going hand in hand, talking to our partners, and addressing the root causes of these conflicts. There is a lot we can say about climate too. We need to remove, some of the consequences of climate change with feed insecurity and with feed humanitarian needs from the needs. So when we look at and the discussions in these corridors are very much how we can do with the shrinking budgets. What do we do? Well, first, let's do not make an opposition between security and development. Our Prime Minister announced more than a month ago the most significant increase in security spending, security, not defense, security spending in the history of our country in 1 year. But he said, and he put 4 sort of conditions to it. The last one is that this is not going to do at the expense of development cooperation and diplomacy, because that's another way of investing in a safer world. And by the way, quite an efficient and effective one, because €1 spent in peace saves €100 in addressing the consequences of conflict.
Okay, well, Spain, and I think from what we heard from the German finance minister, these are maybe the outliers. Let's see if they're going to be the norms, because let's go to what no one's raised so far, which is, of course, the White House. And they have made this very binary choice between security and development. They have said it's peace through strength, and strength means rearmament as opposed to aid. And they've slashed US AID. Do we see that as setting an example? We've seen the UK, for example, slash their ODA budget and spend it on rearmament. Or do we think that this view that we're seeing in Europe is going to be the one that prevails? Robin, would you like to take that?
I think it's a global trend, and everyone will have a good explanation for why their security priorities need to top everything else. That we see it globally in different versions, of course, but to me it's a global trend. 2.7 trillion cannot be explained by just one country or one region alone. To me, the conundrum really is we know the answers. Everyone on this panel has said it. The Secretary General has said it for years. Peace and development go hand in hand. No one is questioning that. At the Summit of the Future last year, states again agreed on that very basic insight. And yet,
but Robin, while no one might be questioning it in this room, we see very different actions taken by governments of substance.
Yeah, but the question to me then is, why is it that when security deteriorates, and it is deteriorated, why is it that so quickly we deprioritize all the other agendas, development, same for international diplomacy, cooperation, international law? There's always an urgent security need that can top, other concerns. I think one is incongruence of timelines. Security threats are always urgent, super imminent, and if you respond to them, you see short-term results. What we're discussing here is all long-term, the impacts of development, of international cooperation, of development, of diplomacy, much more subtle, long-term, difficult to track and to trace. And it's just one part of the explanation. But clearly, to me, the big question is why, against all wisdom and experience, is it that so quickly we fall into this eternal trap that we prioritize security over just everything else, when in the 21st century, the security threats from climate change, environmental degradation, technology that could get out of hand, biosecurity threats, pandemics, it's a full plate. Why would you just put all your eggs in one basket? You're going to need a very kind of big toolbox to address all of this. So, deterrence and military is one big tool. It's the hammer in this toolbox. But, a hammer doesn't fix all of your problems. And so there's a lot more.
You sound a little skeptical about peace through strength. María, I can see you wanting to come in there.
Yeah, no, I don't think I need it.
Just to say, I'm not skeptical all the way, when it comes to military means and deterrence. The UN Charter acknowledges an inherent right to self-defense, and this is just the starting point in a way. But it also acknowledges that there is so much more, and I'm just fearful we're losing track inside of that.
No, I just wanted to expand a little bit on what you were saying, because really the problem is that security and development have completely different speeds. So, for instance, I was talking about this, positive deviance which we have seen in Colombia in crop substitution. Those have taken at least 15 years to be there. So
it can be a generation.
Yeah, it's a generation.
Yeah.
So the problem is, but the other problem I would like to point out is that, for instance, in Colombia, we are in the middle of a different conflict, which is something between armed conflict and organized crime. So we really need a different approach, and we really need to think it differently from the security point of view, but also we need a lot of justice into this. And the other thing is that from the structural point of view, it's not only development, it's also that we have huge weaknesses in our local governments. And we need to address those weaknesses. And we are not going to address them through development nor through security. So that is the point also.
Ambassador, I can see that what she's saying is resonating deeply with you here.
Yes, it resonates. And I would just add a third pillar to what we have said, security development, but also human rights. Human rights are very important. And as you know, the former late SD Kofi Annan also said it. We cannot have peace and development without human rights. And I'm just coming from Cotonou, where we organized last week a regional meeting of the Human Rights Council, because Benin is a current member of the Human Rights Council. And we, during this regional meeting, we addressed the very needs of African countries in upholding human rights. It's very important. You cannot, the most effective way to also prevent crisis is to uphold human rights. And I think it's very important to add it and to underline it. And we very much have a very interesting discussions, Benin, focused on our needs in capacity buildings, in building partnerships that can help us engage more in the Human Rights Council work at African level, but also to contribute to the enforcement of the capacities in every African country. It's very important to also underline this point, I think.
Antón, yes, sorry.
Just to add, I fully agree that actually security, development, and human rights go hand in hand. But what we have now, might is right, has become the new reality of our world. So conflicts in each and every part of our world is the new reality. And the states are more concentrated on their security than on human rights and development issues. Yep. But these three things can go hand in hand, and there is a need for integrated approach. Because on the other hand, at the end of the day, the availability of arms and misuse of arms will fuel the undevelopment. And in this sense, how the development inequalities and institutional weaknesses in turn will drive insecurity.
And where do you see the main driver of ensuring that these things work hand in hand? Is it at your government level? Do you need the cooperation and help of your neighbours? Is it a multilateral forum? Which ones work for you best?
Of course, the first is the regional cooperation. Because once you are living in one region, you will not escape from your neighbors. You should cooperate with your neighbors to resolve the issues. And this cooperation should be mutually beneficial. And this cooperation should be based on people-to-people contact, on economic benefits. Once you have interconnected interests, this will lead to development, this will lead to a situation where the conflict is not so much beneficial for the countries. And it will have a certain cost for the countries if they start the conflict, if they start a violation. So in this regard, the connectivity, trade, transport, energy cooperation are the main things that can resolve the existing issues and can lead to cooperation and can lead to more stability and more peace.
Antón, going back to the broader picture of where we find the narrative of support for international development in light of your conference that you're hosting, how much of a setback has what the United States done been, or is it actually one that's created opportunities?
Look, there is this stereotype that every crisis is an opportunity. I'm not going to repeat it, but what happens with the stereotypes is that they are real, right? Like that's what we use them. But indeed, I partly because those of us that work in development and humanitarian work, we are optimists by nature. I see a lot of opportunities. I think there are, first of all, opportunities to find a new narrative that is consistent between North and South. There is many forces that want to divide us. But I think what we are going to see in Seville is not a division between North and South. I think what we're going to see is countries, and not just countries and governments, more and more civil society, private sector, actors saying, yes, we think investing in global solidarity, it is important. There is a geopolitical dimension to all of this. Why are we spending more in security in Europe? And I'm not Minister of Defense. Again, my Prime Minister has announced a big investment in security. That's probably because we were not spending enough in our defense.
And that is also
and we had a war of aggression
too, isn't it? I mean, that has been driven by the change in the White House as well?
No, well, yes, but it has been driven by the first war of aggression in European territory over the last 80 years. And we live in the continent that is the bloodiest of all of them represented in this group. So it really wakes up the worst periods. So yes, Europe needs to invest more in its own self-reliance. Maybe we cannot depend on others as much as we did. By the way, the development system and the humanitarian system cannot also depend so much on a single actor. We need to work more and more together. And I think what this is emerging slowly but surely is a new narrative of development cooperation that is much more horizontal, that is no longer about a paternalistic approach between North and South. We talk to partners, to our partners in West Africa and the Sahel. It's like, what do you need? How can we go about this together? We do have values that unites us, and certainly the support for multilateralism, for human rights, and so on. But there are also interests, and that is an argument that we're trying to make to people at home, is investing in development and humanitarian work is investing in a safer world, also for Spaniards, for our taxpayers as well. It's true that the benefits are always a bit difficult to explain, why a euro spent in West Africa or in Colombia is making Spanish people safer. But it is there. And I think what we are seeing in public opinions is not a deterioration of, let's say, less heart for or less willingness to show global solidarity. In the situation we are at, development cooperation is more needed than anything. There is, of course, the argument that some of these challenges we have can only be tackled working together, including security challenges. It's not my job, but we are working on common security with our partners in West Africa, of course, because we share a geopolitical space. We have an interest in their stability, their prosperity, and it all goes together, And I understand we are a humanitarian agency as well, and I was mentioning IHL. When we do humanitarian work, we really have neutrality, impartiality, and so on. But it's all the same. It's like, and this is where we're going to see in Seville, who thinks that we need to work with one another to tackle peace, to tackle development, and so on. And there is, for the Europeans in the room, there is a geopolitical argument to all of this. We need partners. We need partners. We can build up our military capacities to, let's say, be able to fend off a war of aggression, an aggression by an external actor. And again, unfortunately, there are precedents. But we also need to be, as Europeans, a power in the world that reaches out to others, that builds solid alliances, that really go, that are multifaceted, that create more interconnectedness, because more trade, which is also under question, trade, development cooperation, and so on, that creates bounds between all of us, and it makes conflicts less likely.
And another part of the tapestry that we haven't mentioned so far is the role of the private sector and business. One of the green shoots of terrible conflict is that reconstruction needs to happen after conflict. And I remember being at the Ukraine Recovery Conference and just watching business after business pledge billions towards greening Ukraine's reconstruction when and if that happens. Is there a role here where we need to leverage the private sector a lot more than we do in discussions like this? Maria, do you have experience of this in Colombia?
Yes, quite a lot. Well, it's not that easy to engage the business, though we work a lot with the business community, but it's not easy because peace, on the contrary of what we believe, divides. The peace agreement in Colombia divided our country in a terrible way, and of course, the business community is part of the society, and they were divided. So it was very difficult to bring them in. We can't talk exactly about reconstruction in our context because our peace agreement, and we have had several peace agreements in the past, none of them as sophisticated as the one we had in 2016. But we have had, we have been building peace and at the same time having internal armed conflict. So at the same time. So we can't talk exactly about reconstruction, probably more about transitions in certain areas of the country. And yes, we have been able, nonetheless, to bring in the business community by different mechanisms. We have, after the signing of the peace agreement, there was this particular mechanism that is called work for taxes. And it is a mechanism in which the private sector can use their income tax or part of their income tax to do works in specific and target regions of Colombia. And it has been really amazingly successful. The problem is that that scale is still very small. But we have been working on that with the private sector, and they're very eager to come in. So I think that the thing is that we need to think about which sort of incentives can we give the private sector. They're not going to come in just because they're good people. They need incentives. No, it's for real. They need incentives, and they need incentives to go to areas that are very challenging and that are not very appealing for investment. So you need to target specific incentives, and we have a number of experiences in Colombia that really works, but we need to scale them up.
Ambassador?
Yes, on that issue of private sector, I think it's important to bear in mind the link that the crisis also provoke on that situation. Because when you look at the private sector, you think about attract investment. But our countries, most of African countries that are hit by crisis, they are not seen as a favorite destination for investments. So that's also where everything is linked.
Going back to your rule of law problem, yes.
Exactly. And that's also why my country, Benin, in international arena, we used to advocate for the improvement of the risk perception in Africa, because it's also important to attract investment. And to do so, we need, of course, to address the root causes of crisis, but we need also that international agencies also, try to renew their narrative about Africa, because that's also important for attracting of investment. And I think it's important not to think about private sector just for rebuilding countries, but before that, we need them also to build, to develop. And Benin, for instance, in our national strategy for development, we favor 3 pillars: enhance the rule of law, of course, promote good governance, because it's also key to attract investment. But the second pillar is also to accelerate the structural transformation of the economy, to also offer opportunities for private sector to invest. And the third pillar is to improve the well-being of the people. It's also crucial to have well-educated people, to attract investment. So all is linked, and we need to tackle all these challenges in a very integrated approach.
And how do you feel that the leadership of these UN agencies has been?
We all see what it looks like today. There is a crisis of legitimacy from that are, hidden, most of them, but we have also a financial crisis now. Where I'm coming from Geneva, where all the agencies now are, looking at solutions to at least to react to what we all know as a sort of decreasing of financing of international agencies. We need also to enhance multilateralism. Enhance multilateralism is also about to enhance international agencies to help them, at least when it comes to
what would enhancing multilateralism look like? How would it make meaningful progress for you?
Universal participation. We need to promote universal participation. That's also why the issue of reforming the international agencies is also a crucial issue. How can we today accept again that most of the leadership of these organizations are geographically unbalanced? We can't accept it no more. So we need also to progress on that issue of representation.
I want to ask each of you, where clock is ticking, but I'd like to go around each of the panel. We've got about a minute each. looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest setback in your field, but also the biggest opportunity that you have if we were to hold this panel in another 2 years? Deputy Foreign Minister, why don't we start with you?
It's a very difficult question, especially if we consider that we are going to have 2 years consecutive. But peace, we should recognize that, is not only the absence of the war. It's also the stability. Mm-hmm. And the example that I have brought regarding the EU monitoring mission clearly shows this. Because in the context of the absence of institutional peace in our region, the monitoring mission has proven to be very efficient in ensuring stability. And this stability also ensured the development of the regions. So even in the absence of the peace, institutional peace, there is a possibility for the development. And even when it is not finalized, the stability, it is not finalized peace somewhere in the world, there is a possibility to consider this nexus between security and development. Mm-hmm. And it is very important nowadays to move forward to promote this nexus, because this will also in its turn contribute to the peace.
And what's your biggest worry?
Our biggest worry is, as in any other part of the world, it's war of aggression. Continuing war of aggression, continuing degradation of the main principles of international law and UN Charter, like territorial integrity, inviolability of borders, human rights issues, and overall the violations of international law and international humanitarian law. Mm.
Antón, same question.
Look, on the challenges, I would echo the Deputy Minister, because I think what we are seeing is an unraveling of a system that has been there for 80 years, based on very basic principles. We are seeing that they are optional. We are seeing very legitimate accusations of double standards and so on. That's a tricky one. But I think, if I have to say what's the biggest challenge, I think is the crisis of trust. Trust in one another, trust between North and South, trust in multilateral organizations and so on.
Even what you read on the internet these days. Don't load X.
Well, yes, you shouldn't go on the internet in the first place. Yes, this issue of trust, and I think that's what we want Sevilla to sort of humbly try to fix, is can we find common ground? And maybe that's not the 200 members of the UN, but those of us that are committed to these things, let's push forward, because the risk is that we only send negative messages, things do not work, we are not making progress. I don't like the term coalition of the willing, but we really need to see alliances. And this is no longer about donors and recipients, it's about really all of us. What I would like to see is reform. And I think, frankly, again, I'm not a pessimist at all. The financial crisis is going to bring about reform, but we can come out with a system that is weaker, or we can come out with a system that is stronger. And that means talking more between security, the security sector, and the development sector. We need to connect much more Munich and Hamburg in a way.
Yeah, integrate the both. Very, very great comment, Antón. We only have 1.5 minutes left, so Robin, if you'd like to do yours in abridged form.
Yeah, maybe we need a Frankfurt conference on security.
Yeah, I think so.
No, I agree with what has been said here, but if I have to choose, I would say the lack of a common and positive vision for where we actually want to go is a big part of the problems that we're currently facing, because we're in a very reactive mode. We're running from crisis, and the next one is just around the corner, whatever it'll be. And it will again tilt the balance in one or the other direction, but erratically so. We've kind of lost the compass and probably in our institutions also the moral authority to guide the way forward. I think there's a longing worldwide for that kind of moral beacon and authority. There was huge interest in the Pope election recently. I think that's an indicator. The moral beacon for me is really international law, but that seems to be grossly out of fashion. That I think is a big mistake. and things will, the tide will turn again. But that lack of an overall common positive vision that we work towards too, because the list is endless of what is the biggest challenge. I don't know. Interstate war, is it climate change? Will we burn in bomb fire or in sunlight? I don't know. And then there's pandemics, and the list is long, and AI could spiral out of control. We can go forever, and it's very depressing and doom and gloom.
Which is why I asked for the opportunity as well.
Positive vision to go forward.
Okay, great. Maria, we've only got about 10 seconds each left. I'm so sorry.
No
Can you do it?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go really local. And I think I'm going to go to Latin America. And I think that the hugest problem we have is fragmentation, political fragmentation. It's completely impossible right now to have common agenda in Latin America, while we are facing a huge challenge with organized crime across the continent. So I think that is the greatest challenge we are facing. And then I will go really local. In Colombia, I think that we really need to, there are very little space for cooperation, and in our country, international development cooperation right now. So we really need to look into those sparks of progress and really focus on those and try to bring them into another level. There are a lot of them, but we have had a lot of money coming into our country after the peace agreement, and now it's lost. So,
Ambassador, I'm so sorry we didn't get to you. we had the bell ring, which means I really have to wrap this panel. Everyone, thank you very much for attending. I'm sure you can all agree that was a stellar panel. Thank you very much.